Breaking news in the war in Iran. President Trump right now meeting with top advisors at the White House on Iran's latest peace deal offer. Trump telling Axios that it's a, quote, solid 50-50 when it comes to whether an acceptable deal will be reached or the U.S. will, quote, blow Iran to kingdom come. This all comes, keep in mind, as Secretary of State Marco Rubio said today an update on negotiations will be coming very soon.
As I said, there's been some progress done, some progress made. Even as I speak to you now, there's some work being done. There is a chance that whether it's later today, tomorrow, in a couple days, we may have something to say. But this issue needs to be solved, as the president has said, one way or the other. Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. The straits need to be opened without tolls. They need to turn over their enriched uranium. They need to turn over their highly enriched uranium. We need to address that issue. We need to address the issue of enrichment. These are the president's points consistently.
Joining me now is editor of The Insider, Michael Weiss. So, Michael, we're seeing this story sort of develop hour by hour today. Given Iran's grip on the Strait of Hormuz, its resistance to nuclear concessions, and its government largely intact, doubts are growing, really, as to whether President Trump will even be able to negotiate a deal at this point he can frame as a geopolitical win. So what's your assessment of where this is all heading and, of course, where things stand right now?
Well, I think it's clear that Trump wants out of this war. All the reporting I've been able to do and talking to sources in the administration, he has buyer's remorse. He feels like he was sold a bill of goods by members of his own administration, but also by the Israelis who said, we can go in and we can take out the regime. We can foment an insurgency. There were all these sort of harebrained schemes to arm Kurdish militias and so on. None of that really materialized. And in terms of the operational objectives of the war, you can say that, well, we achieved some of them. The Iranian Navy is largely at the bottom of the ocean or the sea. But the missile program, not quite taken care of. And the intelligence assessments that keep coming out suggest that they're actually far more intact than had previously been assumed. You just played Marco Rubio talking about the highly enriched uranium. The Israelis want to go in and physically remove it. Trump seems to be keener on some kind of grand bargain with Iran to have it removed by the Iranians themselves, perhaps in exchange for sanctions relief. There's all kinds of contradictory reporting floating around about a memorandum of understanding, which security hawks and sort of pro-war elements in this country are rather bereft on Twitter because they see what's coming if this reporting bears out as a diplomatic capitulation, something worse than the JCPOA, which Barack Obama negotiated with Tehran. So it's a bit hard to make a determination. I mean, you had the president just put up on Truth Social within a few hours ago a map showing Iran as the 51st American state. So he kind of toggles between a deal is coming and threats to restart the war. And that's something the Israelis, I think, are very keen on. Their press is suggesting that Steve Witkoff, the sort of all-purpose special envoy to everything in this administration, is the guy who's suing for more time, who wants to give the diplomatic track more of a runway. So I don't know. I mean, that's the honest answer. It's very difficult to make an assessment or a prediction about what Donald Trump is going to do tomorrow, the next week, or the next month.
Yeah, I said last hour, it's hard for Americans just to keep up with so much back and forth, which is, of course, layered with uncertainty, right? The New York Times reports Iran is discussing a partnership now with Oman to impose shipping fees in the Strait of Hormuz. Despite strong opposition, of course, from the Trump administration, Tehran, though, arguing the charges would be for maritime services, not illegal transit tolls. So does this essentially amount to Iran demanding protection money? I mean, what does this mean? Is this to stop disrupting global trade? Would the U.S. even agree to this?
So, yes, it is protection money. It will enrich the regime. And we've already seen, there's been reporting suggestive that Iran has been able to reconstitute some of the weapons programs that were destroyed in this war so far at a much faster rate than had been anticipated by the U.S. intelligence community. But also keep in mind the symbolic value of this. Paying the IRGC any money violates international sanctions, which have been codified not just by the United States, the European Union, and the United Nations. So Iran would see this as a big symbolic win. Any country, any tanker would have to pay a toll to a proscribed terrorist organization. Whether the United States goes for it, well, see above about what Donald Trump may or may not do. But, I think that the top line of this is that, look, Iran has taken a real beating in this war. There's no question about that. But the question is, do they see themselves as having lost? And I don't think that they do. They're speaking with a great deal of bravado. The very fact that their regime is still intact means that for them, this is a victory. They've managed to stare down the great Satan. They have imposed their own blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, to which we've countered with our blockade. But, they don't see themselves as having have to give up very much at this point. And, they're very good at negotiating. And I think the danger for the United States is Iran is negotiating in their minds from a position of relative strength compared to where we were before the start of this war.
And, so much of this war is about leverage and which country has more leverage when. But this week, Secretary Rubio raised the specter of military intervention in Cuba. I want to talk about Cuba right now, warning that Cuba is a national security threat because of its ties to Russia and China. This comes, though, after the Justice Department this week charged 94-year-old former President Raul Castro for his alleged role in downing 2 planes 30 years ago. So Trump is reportedly betting his Venezuela regime change playbook here. Will this work in Cuba? What do you see happening?
So a senior U.S. intelligence official told me several weeks ago that the policy that's being pursued by CIA, and, you had Director Ratcliffe just in Havana with a delegation of CIA officers there, is one of, you might call it coercive privatization. The analog would be what happened in Eastern Europe after 1989, 1991, and the collapse of Soviet communism. Everybody gets rich, and that would entail bribing some of the Cuban elites, particularly in the intelligence and military apparatus, giving them a choice, essentially. You can either keep your ill-gotten gains and allow America in, foreign direct investment, the diaspora from Florida pours in and, restarting the tourism industry and so on, or you'll lose everything. And the real policy implementation that I would pay attention to has been Executive Order 1404, which was passed earlier this month. This imposes secondary sanctions on Cuba. Everyone thinks because we've had this blockade that's persisted, for 70 years that Cuba has been crippled by international sanctions. That's not true. The blockade really impacts Americans transacting with the Cuban regime. Secondary sanctions, though, mean that anybody, Chinese, Russian, any Latin American countries, any African countries, can suffer the full weight of America's economic penalties if they do any business with Cuba. So the 2 entities that have been sanctioned since that executive order was implemented, Gaesa, which controls between 40 and 70% of the Cuban economy, and the Directorate of Intelligence, which is kind of a deep state in Cuba. It's the spy service. They were built up by the KGB. All of these guys, basically, the pressure point is, as I said, you either can keep what you've stolen, but also liberate the country in terms of allowing humanitarian aid. Marco Rubio dangles $100 million, which he wants to funnel through the Catholic Church and other aid organizations, thereby bypassing these corrupt institutions that the Castro regime has built, or, the threat of military action. But I think it's important to keep in mind, whilst the Iran file is unresolved, is America going to kind of walk and chew gum at the same time here? We're going to impose a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz and conduct kinetic operations in Cuba, which might result in, I don't know. I mean, there's been reporting in Axios the Cubans have stockpiled Iranian and Russian drones, which could possibly target Florida. So, there's sort of a big debate here about, is this a side quest for Donald Trump, or is the policy, let's stick to the Western Hemisphere and resolve everything that we've done in the Middle East up to this point?
And then you have the Cuban people stuck in the middle of all of that.
Exactly.
Michael Weiss, thank you so much for your time today.